Thanks for joining us for today's MSDN webcast, Project 2010 Solution Starters Drill Down and Code Walkthrough Part 3 of 4, presented by Mike Shagru. With that, I'm going to go ahead and hand the floor off to Mike.
Thanks, Otto. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. In this webcast today, we'll be covering another set of our 2010 Solution Starters. On today's slate, we're going to cover 4. We're going to cover Dynamical Workflow, the Workflow Visualization web part, the Workspace Custom Field web part, and the Workspace List Viewer web parts. So 3 web parts and then a nice little workflow feature as well. Just again to make sure that everybody on the call understands, this is developer focused. The majority of the session today will be spent inside of Visual Studio and looking at C# code and that sort of thing. So if you're not comfortable with C# and development, this is probably not the right webcast for you. So let's kick this thing off right away. We'll go into the Dynamic Workflow Solution Starter. This is basically a feature that allows you to build a sequential workflow in PWA without any Visual Studio intervention or knowledge whatsoever. So this is great. We found that a lot of customers that use workflows, I would say, I'm just going to guess a number, but say 80 or 90% of the workflows that people typically build are simple sequential workflows. So we can build those here. We can have someone that's more of, say, an administrator or someone that's not necessarily a programmer build some of our workflows for us without having to do anything with Visual Studio. So this is very cool. Some cool features or some cool technical highlights in here. There's a bit of Windows Workflow Foundation involved. Obviously, there's some Project Server involved, and there's obviously a bit of SharePoint development as well. So it covers some interesting topics, and I think you're going to like how this thing was implemented. It's really pretty slick. So I'm going to switch right away back over to my demo machine, and let me just pull up the deployment. I know I've done this in the other webcast, but I'll do it again in case somebody's missed one of the previous ones. But typically, I just want to show this is what our PowerShell deployment script looks like, and they're pretty similar for most of these solution starters because they're all just features. But basically, this is it right here. We just have a few variables we set at the beginning. We come down and we have some where we disable and uninstall and retract the feature, and then we go ahead and reinstall, the solution and the feature back through. I'm not going to run through this in detail because I've done it before, but I just want to say, if you're not familiar with PowerShell, these are some great places to start. You can grab these and change some things and use them for your own solutions, and gives you a great head start on getting into PowerShell. So let me go ahead and close that down. So I've already deployed this particular instance. So let me just show you what it looks like when we go into, so after you install this, it should be installed as a feature on your site. And in fact, if you go into your, Site Collection Features, you should see this feature right here, Demand Management Dynamic Workflow. And as you can see, it's already activated. So we're ready to go. So now that we're ready, how do we use this thing? Let's go back to Site Settings. And we want to go into our workflow settings screen. And you can see that I've already defined one, but I'm going to go through another one here. So what we need to do is add a workflow. So you can see now that we have these workflow templates that are available to us. And if we had built other workflows, say in Visual Studio, and installed those into this system, we would see those in this drop down as well. So, but this DM Dynamic Workflow one is the one that we just installed using PowerShell. So what I'm going to do is make a unique name for this, and we'll just call this the new little cryptic, but good enough. And this is where kind of the fun starts with this particular feature. So this is a standard SharePoint screen. When I hit Next, normally that would typically be it for defining the workflow. However, you'll see here that we've hit this custom screen, which is part of the feature. I want to point out, if you look at the URL up here in the address bar, you see that we've been redirected to this page, CSTWRKFLIP. I think it stands for Custom Workflow Information Page. So what this is a standard feature in SharePoint. It's called the Workflow Association and Initiation Form. And I'll show you, when we go through the code walkthrough in a few minutes, I'll show you how we sort of wire this thing up. But basically what we've done here is we've built an InfoPath form. And using the standard feature in SharePoint, when we wire up some details, it knows that, hey, when I hit next, when I'm defining a workflow, for this particular workflow, I want to go ahead and display this form. And this is inside of an InfoPath or control that knows how to display an InfoPath form. So what we can do is basically we can pass data into this form. We can then add data, as I'll show you in a minute. And then when we're done, the data gets then sort of pushed back out into SharePoint and saved off for us. And we can then use that later to dynamically build our workflows based upon this information. So that's kind of at a high level what's going on here. So this is our InfoPath form. I'm going to go ahead and define a real simple dynamic workflow just to give you the flavor. So you can see the first thing I have to do is select a stage. And these are all the predefined stages that if I went out under service setting stages, out under the workflow options, you'd see all these defined. So there's nothing special here. This is just reading the list from the PSI. So let's go ahead and define one. We're going to start off with initial proposal details. Probably a good starting point. I can put a status message in. So now let's just do this. And then we can also select here if we want this to force a submit on the stage. So you can see here it gives you a pretty good description of when you'd want to use this or when you wouldn't. I'm just going to say no on forcing these. I'm just going to make this super, super easy. And then in addition, just so you can see, if I say yes on approval settings, this thing opens up and allows me to go in and select, different users groups, the different types of approvals. So I can get fairly detailed here with how this approval process works on this stage and actually any stage. But again, for this example, I'm just going to say no and keep this really simple. So I just defined my first workflow stage here with a few clicks of a mouse. Now I want to add some more. I'm going to add a couple more. So we did initial proposal details. The next one we'll do here, we'll do selection review. Pick that guy, put in a message. Let's say no on that one as well. And then we'll add one more stage in the final stage, and we'll call it final assessment. And we'll make this one no also. And so just to point out a few other, I guess, obvious things, this InfoPath form is very nice. So it allows you to add the stages. I can also obviously move them up and down or rearrange them any way I want to, which is nice. I can collapse them here. You can see this. So this is pretty cool. I'm going to move this back down. I can also delete and add stages. So very easy to manipulate and order any stages that I decide that I want to add to this workflow. So I'm done. This is our very simple workflow that we'll use. Now I'm going to hit the submit button on the InfoPath form. When that happens, under the covers, InfoPath is going to basically take all that XML data that's inside this form and pass that back into SharePoint, and that's going to be used by our dynamic workflow to basically generate these three workflow activities. Let's go ahead and do that. And you can see we're done. So now we have these here's the new workflow that we just created. So let me go off now and actually do one more thing, and then we'll try and use this, and you can see it in action. What we have to do now is we've got a workflow that's sitting out there that's been defined, but it's not attached to any project yet. So what we need to do is create a new enterprise project type, or also known as an EPT. And this is new in Project 2010. So let's just let's make a new one here. This is really easy. We'll call it Dynamic EPT. You can see that the dynamic workflow is now associated right here. And the rest of these pieces of information we'll just leave as default. They're fine. Let's go ahead and save that. So now you can see we've just created a new EPT. So this is now this is a template type for any project that we create of type dynamic EPT. And whenever I create a new project of that type, it's going to automatically be put into the workflow that we just defined. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll go into Project Center. And I'm going to create a new project, and you can see dynamic EPT. So there's the project type, and we'll just call this new dynamic project. This is all we really need to do. So this is our initial project data that we need to kick this thing off. You can notice up here in the right-hand corner that it gives you some status messages in this little yellow box. So it's off in the background now in the queue creating this stuff. And sure enough, it did it. So now we've got our project has basically been initially created, and we're now sitting in this workflow. And you'll notice here I just opened this workflow stages list. And you can see that sure enough, these are the stages that I created dynamically. Initial proposal details, selection, and final assessment, right? Within these two phases, create and finish, basically. So this is a kind of a shortcutted workflow, but nevertheless demonstrate the point. So at this point now, we can come in. You can see that it's waiting for us. It needs us to fill in some summary information. So we can go ahead and click on that stage, and it should bring up the PDP that allows us to fill this information in. So let's do that. And now, so this is where the workflow is getting instantiated and sort of under the covers. What's happening is our sort of shell workflow, our dynamic workflow that really doesn't have anything in it, basically gets that information we saved off in the settings when we created the workflow template, and it's creating these workflow activities on the fly here as we're running. So that's what's going on behind the scenes. But it looks like a normal workflow. This is how it would look if I defined it in Visual Studio. Exactly the same. So let me go ahead and fill some of this stuff in. You'll notice here that anything with a red star is required, so if we don't do that, it'll complain to us. Let's go ahead and save. You can see again I get the processing messages up in the corner. All right, that's done. Let's go ahead and submit it. So there you go. So now this workflow has actually now been instantiated, and you can see here these are the different pages within the workflow that we need to fill in. So you'd come through here. We'll click on the next one. We'll add some more information. So this thing's basically forcing us to fill in certain information that's required by these pages. So we'll save this. That's complete. These aren't required, but we'll fill in them anyway, just for demo purposes. Fill in some dates, do a save. And the rest of these I'm not going to fill in. I don't think they're not going to matter. So now we get a schedule. We can actually put some initial task information if we have some high-level tasks, if we want to. Strategic impact, we don't have anything defined for that, but if we did want to do some kind of portfolio analysis, we would see the drivers here and be able to enter that information as well. And then we finally get to the last step in the workflow, and we need to just put in a couple more pieces of information. So I'll just pick a date and type in this. And now we say save. And we're done. So you can see here now we've completed all the workflow steps. So this works exactly. You can see here this is the status of each of the different stages, and they're all completed. So we just now used our dynamic workflow and ran through it just like a normal workflow that we would have built in Visual Studio. So no difference whatsoever. So you can see how easy that was. Within literally a couple minutes, we've implemented a sequential workflow that did some really cool stuff. So with that, now you know how sort of this works at the sort of the PWA user interface level. Let's take a peek down inside the code, and we'll show you some of the nice things that this thing is doing for us. So let's go right into, let's show you this one first, features. So we've got a small event receiver here that's been defined, and I'm not even going to bother debugging into this. So basically, when you go out and you enable the feature, you can see up here on top that we have a feature activated. So when I push the activate button over there in the site settings, this gets executed, and basically it's just going to call this function, and it's just going to add some stuff down into the config file. So nothing too fancy there, but anyway, just so you know, there's this small event receiver that's being installed. Let's get down into this. This is an important one. So we've got 4 files in this association data parsing folder. The main one here that we care about is this association data parser, and this is the piece of code that basically knows how to parse the data out of the info path XML and parse it into a usable format that then can be used inside of our dynamic workflow to create those dynamic activities that we just created. So this is the guy that's basically when the workflow gets started up, I'll show you that in the code here in a second. It gets started up, it's going to instantiate this class and then call this getStageInfo information. And you can see here it loads up this association data, which has been passed back from the info path form back into SharePoint, and now SharePoint is providing this to us right here. It's just a gigantic piece of XML. And we load this up into an XDoc. We do a few things, and now what we're going to do is, you can see here, there's just some code here that's just going through and selecting out the stages and building a list, and it returns us this list of stages. So that's all it's really doing. And then in addition, there are some other features or some other methods in here. You can see this one goes and parses out the approval information. If we had filled in all that approval information that opened up on the info path form, that would be done here as well, and that would be returned back and incorporated into the dynamic workflow. So that's really what's going on in this piece of code, and it's pretty important. These other files are just data containers. So the approval info just holds. This is basically the class that holds the collection of approval information that gets passed back that I just showed you in the association data parser code. Same thing with resource. It's just another container, again, that's used to pass back sort of normalized data back to the dynamic workflow. And then finally, the stage info as well. So this is the class that contains information about each stage that's going to be dynamically created that we set up in PWA. So that's really what's going on in this folder, is all that parsing. Here's the next folder down here, dynamic workflow. A couple interesting things. This is this info path folder is obviously where the info path form is defined, and I'm going to open that up and show you that in the debugger in a few minutes. So I won't open the form now, but basically, this association form DLL. This is the form code that's associated with an info path form. I'm not sure how many people have done info path development work before, but basically what you have is info path is this electronic form, if you will, that's defined by this XML schema. And so it has sort of there's sort of a UI and display characteristics that are known about the form that we saw when we were in PWA. But in addition, you can also write code that's sort of attached to the form that does things behind the scenes when you press buttons or you expand things or whatever actions happen on the form. Those can all be handled and dealt with in C# or in some kind of managed code. And that's what's in this association form DLL. It's been compiled here. So again, this is the code behind, if you will. This is the actual info path definition, the XSN file. So that's what's going on there. We'll drill into that more in a minute. Next is the dynamic workflow. So this is the little sort of piece of stub code that gets executed that really builds the dynamic workflow. You can see here from our designer point of view that there's really nothing going on here. I mean, this thing is the simplest workflow in the world. But in reality, this code activity is where all the magic happens. So let's take a peek in here and show you what's going on. So you can see here, important to notice that when we get this on workflow activated event here, we get this context back in from SharePoint that passes us in this initiation data. So this initiation data is the XML that was saved off from our InfoPath form. So that's how the loop is completed. After that form has been defined, this data gets passed into our workflow when we try to instantiate it, right? So we've got this raw XML in the initiation data, and we've saved it off here, ready to be used. So now we come down and we're going to construct the stages. So we've got sort of this empty workflow that we need to dynamically build activities, workflow activities, which is all part of Windows Workflow Foundation. So what we do is we get this, we build this new object, and this is an object that is part of the Windows Workflow Foundation that allows us to dynamically add activities to our workflow. So that's what we're doing here. This workflow changes object is what's going to allow us to do that. So we instantiate the object. We come down. We have to find this project sequence activity. So we're just going out and getting that particular activity because that's where we're going to insert the stages into. If you go back to, in Project Server, this is a Project Server specific thing when you're executing workflows. They have to work within a project sequence, which is this activity right here. So what we're doing in this code is really just getting that object, that sequence activity, and we're going to stuff in those dynamic ones inside there to be executed. So you can see from the diagram that there's nothing in there right now. Normally, if I was designing this in Visual Studio, I'd open my toolbar, I would grab, some SharePoint activities or some project activities, whatever it is I want to build, and I'd be dropping them in here, and you'd see a whole complex workflow. This is empty, but it's going to be dynamically built as we go along. So that's what's happening. So we get the sequence. Now we call this, you see here, here's the association data parser that I just mentioned. We've got this guy, we go off, and we've passed in this association data, and he's going to return us this list of stages right here. And then we have another object that I'll show you in a minute, which is our sequence builder. And it's just going to build off this sequence of our activities for us, kind of wire them up together. And then finally, we apply the changes. So we've added all this stuff into our workflow, and now we're going to apply it. So this is actually the last step that adds the stuff into our activity. So now we're ready to execute. Now this thing can run all those dynamic activities that we just built. And this is a really small amount of code too. This is really pretty cool. So that's an important one. I would say the Dynamic Workflow CS and the Association Data Parser CS are sort of the two workhorses within this feature. So moving on here, we have our standard elements file that we need to provide. However, I just want to point out, I mentioned earlier in the sort of showing the UI that we had to wire up this custom workflow association InfoPath form into SharePoint. Well, this is where you do it, and it's just a couple lines of XML here. This is the important one. There's actually two of them. So you have to give the association URL. So we're going to actually point it to that custom page that already exists in SharePoint. And this is the page that's going to host our InfoPath form. So it's blank, and then but this and the next piece, this URN, this points to our actual InfoPath form. So this pretty much tells the workflow process to, hey, use this page, and then when you do use it, put this InfoPath form on it. And that's pretty much it. That's how you tell, pretty much how you're going to tell SharePoint to display this custom form for us. And that's what happens there, and there's no coding whatsoever, just a couple pieces of XML. So that's where that gets wired up. Now we've got a couple of extra activities that can also be added to our workflow. So we've got an approval activity, and we've also got this the status activity. The approval activity, this one defines an approval workflow activity. So again, if we had in our custom or our dynamic workflow, if we had find some approval process with that drop down that I opened, some of these would be added in there to handle those that logic. We didn't do it in our sample, but that's what this activity is for. So it's just a custom activity. The other one here, the set project stage with a status activity. This is a container for the dynamically created workflow stage activity. So this is our container that sort of holds all that stuff for us within the activity. So you can see there's not much going on here. It's really just a container. So these are just custom activities. And then the final one here, this C# file, this is just a validation code that makes sure that we don't have any errors and things are wired up right. So that's what's in the workflow activities folder. Approval checker, this is another validation class that just goes out and makes sure that we have, the right things wired up for our approvals, and if it doesn't, it passes back an error. Here's our sequence builder that I mentioned before. This is the actual static method we call to add the activity. So we passed in our sequence object. We passed in the list of those stage infos that we parsed out of the XML, a few other goodies that we need. And then basically this guy just comes down here. You can see it just looping through the stages, and it's building all these activities here. You can see here it's just creating these new activities right here of that type, like the custom one I just showed you. So that's really all it's doing. This is just that custom container activity, and then it's building a list of those. So that's what a sequence builder does, and there's some additional checking here you can see, but it's a pretty simple file. And then finally here, this PSI service, this is kind of the pattern that we've used in a lot of the other solution starters. This is really just a wrapper around some of the web services that we have to call the PSI services. So you can see here we're calling security web service for PSI. We're calling a resource one here. We've got his admin. So you can see there's a few of them in here that we're calling to get pieces of information that we need. And that's all sort of self-contained in the proxy PSI service. So that's the walkthrough on this dynamic workflow. Let me go ahead and bring up the InfoPath form. I want to show you a little bit more about that. Let's come back up here. And I'm going to open this guy in design mode. And this will pull us up in InfoPath. And so you can see somebody has actually done quite a bit of work dropping all these elements in here onto this UI to build this InfoPath form. I'm not going to really touch that, and I'll just point out that an InfoPath, so this is the UI we've defined, and over here on the right in this fields bar, this is the actual structure of the XML, and these fields are mapped over to the fields over here. So you can see as I click on fields, they get highlighted over here within this XML hierarchy. And so this is the exact schema that's going to be passed back to me when I've completed my form. This thing's going to get passed back, filled with data, and that's the association data that we then have our association parser parse through and get things out of and get us back in a more usable list format. So this is the data. And then the final thing I wanted to show you here in InfoPath is the developer tab. So if I go into developer and go into the code editor, this thing's going to spin me off into Visual Studio, and I'll get to look at the form code that's associated with this form. So on this first screen, you obviously can see the UI and how the data is mapped to the UI. In this second part here that just popped up, we're in Visual Studio Tools for Applications. So pretty much Visual Studio, and you've got this code that sort of, when you generate this in InfoPath, it gets sort of a template, and you can set up certain events. So you can see we have action handlers here, right? So it's very similar to programming, say, in like a WinForms app where you'd have some kind of events. So this is similar to like form loading in WinForms app, if you're familiar with those. So this is when the form loads, I can do certain things. And you can see that everything in InfoPath is accessed via XML. So I'm going to load up the XML here and access different nodes. I can access any of the data that's been pushed into the form. I can actually go back and change it, push things back in. I have total access to the data here. You can see there are other handlers here that handle some of the other events that happen on the screen. So for instance, that add button with the green cross, when that gets clicked, this gets fired off, and this just adds another row into that collection of stages.
Okay, we're back in action here.
Great, thanks, Otto. Apologies to everyone. I didn't know I was dropped. Anyway, I hope we're back. So let's continue here. I don't know where my audio dropped exactly, but we're back in the form code. That's the code that's behind the InfoPath form that we use to gather our dynamic workflow information. So I'll just run through this just quickly to show you what we're doing now, which is populating some options and different things that show up on the form. You can see here we just go out and use the DOM to grab different elements within the XML. And you can see here we've made a call. So within the InfoPath form, we're actually calling a web service here, and you can see this is the workflow web service in the PSI. And this is going to go out and retrieve that list of stages that you saw in the drop-down. That's where this gets built right here. One thing I do want to point out, the way this code was written, you'll notice that the URL right here, this base URL, this is hard-coded. And when I originally got this, it was hard-coded to localhost/PWA, which didn't work for my installation. So I now have it hard-coded for what works for me. So a word of warning, when you're going to use this, you'll see an error pop up when this InfoPath tries to load if you don't set this properly. I'm hoping that we're going to have the developer that wrote this fix it so that the URL is passed in and dynamically set for us so we don't have to worry about this. But for the time being, if you download it, keep an eye on this. At any rate, so let me just go ahead and go on through. So that's going to basically build our form. We should now see this form pop up. I'm going to go ahead and just come out of the debugger. I just want to show you this coming up in. And this is building the list of users and stages and all the other pieces of data that we need. So you can see here's the form exactly as we saw it in SharePoint. It was just hosted in a page that that host InfoPath ones. This is just standalone, but it's the same idea. We've got the same list. We have the same actions. I can take that out too. So it works exactly the same. So it's a great way to really get into this form and debug it and see what's going on in a standalone way without sort of the other burden of having it installed in SharePoint. So I think that's enough. At any rate, I encourage you to go ahead and try this out when you download the code. It's pretty interesting code. So that's going to be, that really covers, I think, the dynamic workflow. I hope that was easy enough to understand. Essentially, this guy is on the fly, building those workflow activities for us. So it's pretty cool, and I think this would be very useful in a production environment to allow you to build sequential workflows pretty easily. So let's go ahead and shut that down and step back to our slide deck. We'll move on to the next solution starter. And the next one we're going to cover is the workflow visualization web part. So this is a pretty simple web part that really just displays, that summary is wrong. This is a simple visualization web part that displays graphically our workflow. So we define basically a set of images that we want to use, that an image for each of our stages, and we put that in the SharePoint list. And then this web part, when we set it up, we point off to the list, and then that dynamically goes out, looks at what our workflow is, and then basically displays the images for us. So we can drop this in at some project page to make it easy to see where we are in our current workflow in a graphical way. So it's pretty cool. So let's jump back down. I'll demo this one for you. Close this guy off. So this is just another SharePoint feature. I'm going to go ahead and just run it straight out of the debugger. I think that might be just as easy. So this is a SharePoint feature. I'm not going to go ahead and show you the deployment and the PowerShell on this. It's the same as the other one. There it is. Okay. Let me start this guy up. Looks like it's already starting. There it goes. It's starting to deploy. You can see down here in the bottom left corner. So Visual Studio is actually pushing this thing out for me. Great way to do it for a developer. Not so good for production. So PowerShell is a great way from a production perspective, but this is very nice. There it is. Okay, so let me show you this. When this thing has been deployed, you'll see this off in the features. If you go down to Site Collection Features, you should see that as the, where is it, Workflow Visualization feature. So you see this feature right here, and you can see that it's already been activated for us, so it's ready to go. So let's go ahead and I'll demo this for you. So let's go back into server settings. And I'm going to add this to a PDP so that we can see it in one of our workflows. Okay. I see running. All right, so let's go over to server settings, and I want to add this to the PDP. Yes, there's a couple ways we can do this, but we'll just we'll do it through that mechanism. So we'll go down here to the project detail pages, and I'm going to add it to the project details page so that I can have a nice visual idea of where I am in my workflow when that PDP is displayed. So I'll go in here to project details, bring this guy up. And then I want to go up here and edit the page. Let's go ahead and add the web part. And I want to navigate down to, this one is under the Project Server Add-ons group. And you can see it's not there. I think this needs to be redeployed. So let me pull this back up. Oh, it was retracted, that's why. Let's push this back out. Okay, hopefully it'll be there now. Refresh the page. All right, let's try it again. Add a web part. We'll go down to the Project Server add-on. There it is. All right. Add that guy in. Okay, there it is. So let me drag it down so it looks a little better. Oops. And let's set up the settings. There's only 3 settings here. It's fairly straightforward. So what it's wanting is a document library that contains all the images that it's going to use to display this graphical view of our workflow. So I called it stage images. And once I've entered that, it now can go out and it actually goes into the document library and it shows me all the different files that I've got loaded. And it wants an image for the arrow. So there's the individual stage images, which you can see here that are GIFs. And then I've also got an arrow file that's the graphic that's in between to show the flow of the workflow. So I picked that image, and then finally I need to tell it which of the columns in my document library contains the stage GUID. And that GUID is really what ties all this together, because when I go out and query the PSI and query on the workflow to see what stages are there, it's really the only meaningful thing that comes back is the GUID. So if I can associate the GUID with the image, then it knows what image to display. So that's what I'm doing here. So I set those 3 parameters, and now this thing's ready to go. Let me just step down here and show you this document library. So I had to set this up from scratch. This isn't installed for you as a feature, so you're going to have to do this yourself. And what I did is just very quickly in a paintbrush, I went out and made some images, and you'll see they're really ugly because I'm not a good artist. But I created them myself, added them into this document library, and then you have to be sure to define a column that has your GUIDs, and you're going to have to go out, use the EPT association tool, or use go through the normal server settings process to get the GUIDs from these stages to associate them. Otherwise, some things won't draw right. So you got to do that yourself. Anyway, so let's go back here now. So I've got that set up. The web part's there. Now I'm going to open a project. I'll go into Project Center. I'm just going to make a new project. We'll call it use the Software Development Project. We'll create this guy and get him set up, and then When I step into the project details page for this particular workflow, we should see the new web part there, and it should have my images with the arrows pointing down the workflow, sort of graphically showing me what this thing looks like. Still creating it in the background here. You can see I have my status messages up in the top right corner. Okay, there it is. So you can see if I go down here and click to on my project details page, when that displays, we should see my workflow visualization web part with the beautiful graphics. Oh, there they are. Those nice. So you can see here it is. This is the web part. You can see that the active or the current stage in the workflow has this yellow highlight around it, and that's done for me. You can see the black arrows. That's the arrow image that I had to point to when I set up the web part. And then the rest of these are just the various images that I associated with different stages. You can also see here that there is one stage I left out. I didn't map an image for it on purpose. And just so you know, if you don't map something in your document library, the web part will go ahead and just draw this little gray box with some text in it to take the place. So in reality, you could have all of these gray boxes, and that would be okay. It would still at least be visual. But that's what it does in that default scenario. So that's what the web part looks like. Go ahead and shut this down. We'll take a quick spin through the code. We'll just do our usual. We'll come through the folders. So here's the first significant thing, the controls folder. This is the code. This is the code that goes with, we have two controls. We have a text image control, and this is the actual control that displays each of those workflow stage images. So when you look at the workflow control, or the workflow web part, it is a collection of these text image controls. That's really all that's going on there. And you can see there's some properties in here that we can set to manage these things. But there's really not much going on. You can see right here, this is where we attach the image to the control and it gets displayed. So that's what's going on in this piece of code. The WF viewer code, this is the collection of the images. So you have a main control that contains each of these images for each of the stages. So that's the WF viewer. That's the main control. And you can see in here, it is really just that, just collects all these images up and displays them inside the web part. This is what really gets rendered. So you can see here, we register some script in here, a little bit of JavaScript. And then you can see down here in this particular one where we create the child control, you can see that we're looping through the stages, and we're creating these, here's a text image, we're creating new ones, and we're just basically building it up with these individual text images. So that's basically the list of all the stages that we see. It's basically rendered in this control. Pretty simple. Next one down here in our entities folder. These are basically just metadata containers for data that we use, and these are all wrapping SharePoint objects. So we've got SharePoint fields, field collections, SharePoint file, list items, and a list collection. Just one thing to note as well, in the other solution starters, typically the pattern would be in the IMPL is the implementation folder. So typically these files would be inside the implementation folder. They're swapped. That's just another little oddity to this. Is just an interface definition, nothing really there. Any case, these are the ones that really matter. So you can see here, these are just containers. Not a lot going on there. Just a way to sort of normalize the data that we get back when we query SharePoint. And this guy really is sort of the top level collection that brings back all the stuff. And this stuff is used for going out and getting, when we go out to that document library, this is part of what we use to go out and retrieve the information from the list, like the columns and the list of items and that sort of stuff. So on to the next one, we've got a helper folder, and just one file in here. It's just a very simple it's a helper. It just has some assorted functions that return us information that we need, different lists and things. sort of catch-all, PWA path, project GUID, stuff like that. So that's all down in the helper library or in the helper code. These are the actual controls down here in the library folder. These are the active server custom controls that are sort of related to these guys right here. This is just the display code, so not a lot going on there either. Here's the actual web part code. So here's our elements XML. This is the one that we always use to deploy the thing. Just something, if you want to change the group where this thing shows up in the, when I went up and added a new web part and you saw it in the project server add-ons group, this is where you do it. If you want to change it to something else, this is the spot. Now we'll get into the guts of the web part, and this is fairly simple as well. This guy, you can see here in the render, I'm not even going to walk through this. It does a lot of error checking here to make sure all the different pieces are right. Then you go out and we create this WF viewer control. So he creates that guy, sets up some of the properties, and then creates the stages, which loads them all up and displays them. So that's what's going on here. Very, very simple code. This is a stage container, so when I get my list of stages returned, these are the individual stage instances that are within that list. That's just a data container for that information. This is my resource file that just has various strings that I use in the control. And then finally, this is the tool part. This is the code that controls what happens when I go in and edit my web part. So this is the guy that displays the controls that allows me to enter the arrow image, file name, the stage name, not the stage name, but the what's the other one? The pointer of the document library. That stuff. That's just contained within this code. So that's it. Pretty simple web part. Go ahead and shut that down, and let's move on to the next one. Okay, so the next one we're going to look at is the Workspace Project Custom Field Web Part. And this guy is pretty handy. It allows me to go out and select any number of project custom fields or other fields at the project level and display those in a web part. So any custom fields that are kind of important to me, I can say drop this over in the project's workspace, and I can at a very quick glance see my custom fields. So this is kind of a nice one. Again, it's a pretty simple web part. The main thing it's doing here is just doing some PSI calls and mapping the fields and displaying data. So let's go over and take a look at this. Switch over to the code view again. I'm going to start this guy up in the debugger as well. And so what I'm going to do, I'll walk through this as well. I'll just walk through setting this guy up and showing you what it looks like. And then we'll take a quick spin through the code. Probably not debug it though. The PWA ought to pop up here in a second. There it is. All right, there it is. So I'll need to show you the features. If we go to site settings and we go into the site collection features, you will see, let's see, where is that one? It's, here it is. You'll see this Workspace Project Custom Field Web Part, and it's activated, ready to go. Let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go into, back here and go into Project Center. I'm just going to open up a project. Go into this one. Not what I wanted to do though. Let's see, I want to do this. That's better. That'll take me to the workspace. And what I'm going to do in the workspace is I'm just going to drop this control in here, show you how to set that up, and show you what it looks like, and then we'll take a spin through the code. So let's go ahead and edit the page here. We'll add the web part. And I just want to make a note here, this web part only works in the project workspace because it needs the context there to display things. So anywhere else, then you're going to have a problem. So this one happens to be under the custom group. I would sort of put it under the project server add-ons with everything else, but I didn't write it, so that's the way it is. Let's go ahead and add this in. So you can see here now we've got the field. I'm going to pull this guy down, put it down below there. You can see here it tells us we haven't defined anything yet, so let's go ahead and edit the web part. And let's disable the debugger. All right. So here, really, the only thing that we care about is this one control, and you see the modify button. So if we press modify, we'll get this dialog up. And what it's done is it's gone out using the PSI, and it's queried. For this project, it's queried, and it wants all the project level fields and also all the custom fields and lookup tables and all the other information sort of at a project level that we might want to display is in this list, in the project field list. So now we're just going to go through and pick some so we can see what they look like. And I'll pick a couple with some indicators so you can see what those look like as well. So we'll go with strategic score. Let's go with some of the risk ones. Might be interesting. Risk range, risk score. And then we'll do a couple totals down here as well. Total cost, total benefit, how about that? So they're there. Those will now be the ones that we're going to display. We'll say OK. So get out of editing mode here. And now you can see here's our web part. Now we're displaying the fields that we picked. And you can see that it does a nice job formatting things, and if it's an indicator, it puts up a bitmap, and so forth. So now this gives me a great way to look at custom fields that I'm interested in. So there you go. That's essentially what this web part does. Let's go ahead and spin through the code quickly. Shut this guy off. This is another fairly simple web part. Let's start up here at the top in the DTO folder. This is a pattern we've seen in other solution starters. We've got a couple containers here in the DTO folder. These are really just, again, generic classes that return field data when we go out and make our queries because we need to normalize the data because we're querying custom fields, lookup tables, project fields, et cetera. And those data sets in the PSI are not the same. But this way we get sort of a normalized list of fields. So that's what these are used for. The indicator helper, this has been used in some of the other solution starters. This is something that helps us figure out what bitmap to display for an indicator, which you saw there, the green indicator for that one custom field. This class does that. Down here under the web parts folder, we have our standard elements XML file that defines where the feature is installed, and you can see here we probably want to change that to project server add-ons group instead of custom. There's a piece of JavaScript here. And this is to manage the dialog drop-down list. So when you saw that list full of the project fields, this is actually a little piece of JavaScript that does that on the client side right here. Here's the editor part. So this guy, this is the guy that manages display of the settings that you saw when we go into edit, and it comes up with the list box with our fields. This is the guy that actually manages this stuff as well. You can see here, I guess in this create controls override method, you can see here we're adding some tables and things. But here on the modify button that you saw in the right-hand side, that click event is being basically mapped to this JavaScript script that you saw here in the JS file. That's what's basically we're mapping to that. So when the button's pressed, it calls that little piece of JavaScript and it does its thing. That's what's going on there. Trying to see what else is interesting. This is actually where we go ahead and load the stuff in the list box. So we basically get our list back. We go in here, do some matching, and then those custom fields or the fields that we selected get mapped into the list box right here. So that's what's going on here. It's pretty simple. Here's our main web part code. And again, this is a fairly straightforward web part. So when we render here and render our contents, what's going on is that you can see we basically come out, we set up all of our services that we need to go out and query the PSI. We go out here now with this, in this routine, we go out and get the field data. And that's what this service, you can see here's our project services over here in the folder like we've done elsewhere. So this project service goes out and retrieves all the field information that we need. And then we set up a little bit of HTML here. And then we're basically going to loop through and set up this table right here. So there's just a lot of looping going on, just parsing through the list of fields that comes back, really. There's nothing else too special going on there. Let's spin down to the services real quick. So these are basically our wrapper classes. You've seen these in some of the other solution starters. The custom field service basically wraps the custom field PSI calls. You can see it also calls the view service as well, so it's not just custom fields. This one goes out and gets all the project fields for us. We've got the lookup table service, and this one goes out and basically picks up all the lookup table values you can see right here, so that if some of our selected fields have lookup values, we need to be able to go out and map those, and this is where we get the data. And then finally the project service. And again, this guy just wraps. You can see here's the project web service. We go out and read all of our entities. So when we go out and grab all of our field data, which is, here's the routine right here, one of the things we do is we come out here, we get our lookup table information, then we come through and read up all these entities out of the project. So we go out and get the project fields, we get the associated custom fields, and we also get the tasks. And we only care about the tasks just for that main summary task. So you can see right here, we're getting some information from that. And then we basically look through here and build up our list of fields. That's what's going on in that service. And that's really it. In essence, that's pretty much it for this web part. Just doing a bunch of PSI calls and displaying it in the web part. So let me shut that down, and we'll get back over to our last solution starter, and that is the Project Workspace List Viewer. Back to the slide. Okay, so what is this last one? What is this Workspace List Viewer? This is a web part that allows us to display the contents of a SharePoint list on a page somewhere. So another handy thing, for instance, if I wanted to look at the issues list and have those readily available without having to switch over to the workspace, I can do it with this web part. So that's really what it's for. This is a simple one as well. It's your standard web part, and it's just using SharePoint APIs to go out and read stuff out of the list. And that's pretty much all it does. Let's switch over here in the code. I'll show it to you real quick. So what I'm going to do is go back into Project Center, and I'm going to drop the web part in here so we can see what it looks like, and then we'll take a quick spin through the code. So we're in Project Center, and we'll go to our favorite audit tracking solution, and we'll go to the project details page, and as this thing loads. and we'll add the web part there. So as we're going through there's our pretty workflow. Let's go ahead and edit the page. We'll add another web part here. We'll go down to our project server add-on, and here is our list viewer. Let's go ahead and add it. There it is. Let me drag it down. So there it is. Now let's go ahead and set it up, and there's the real simple setup. It just wants a list title. So we're going to look at the issues list that's over in our workspace. So we'll set that, say OK, and then we will exit out of the, all right, don't know what that was. Try it again. I'm going to go in here and make sure it's deployed. That's normally not the error you'd see. It's deployed anyway. So this is going to go out and deploy it. It's going to restart IIS, so it's going to take another second. But we'll get through this pretty fast. We should be okay on time. Just make sure you can see what it looks like. In fact, while it's doing that, I'll skip ahead to the code and we'll come back and show it to you in a minute. Oh, the deploy field. All right. Now we'll deploy. Okay. So let me skip ahead and we'll come back. I think everybody can probably figure out what's going on with this one. So let's just go down to our folders and we'll start talking about this code. And then we'll come back and I'll show it to you at the end. So here's our helper file. And this guy just has a couple of very simple things. It returns me project good and PWA path. Not much going on there. Here's our elements file that we always have. Here's our web part code. Pretty simple stuff. So on the initialization here, we go out and we get our project good because we need to have that in order to go out and retrieve information about the workspace. So we're doing that, and then down here on it's where the real work happens, down here when we're creating the child controls. So we check here obviously to see if it's in a project context, otherwise it doesn't make a lot of sense for us. So we do that. Then we go out and we basically use our SharePoint APIs. We read the list from the workspace and make sure that things are correct. And then basically we just go out and display the list. I mean, that's pretty much all there is to it here. It's really just setting that information right here. So that's really the bulk of the code is right here in this web part TS. We've got our services folder, and this kind of complies with the standard pattern. We've got our services here that do things like, wrap the WSS PSI calls and that sort of thing. These are containers, and then here's our service that wraps the PSI calls right here, read WSS data. That's our standard service folder. And then the resource file, again, this just holds our strings that we use in our web part, and then the final one here, the tool part. And this is the piece of code that controls what gets displayed in when we set it up and we do edit web part. That's what happens here. Very, very simple. So let me go out now and try this guy again and show you what it looks like. Because this is probably the simplest of all the solution starters right here. Unfortunately, it reset IIS, so it's just going to take a minute here to sort of reload and cache everything up. No, I don't think it wants to cooperate with me here. One last try. We'll go to another instance here. I've got a whole bunch of them. Let's do this on the fly here and see what we can do. Since this is our last one, we've got a few minutes. So I'm going to go in here and just deploy it. We'll go down to, here's our list viewer. We've got a deployment folder. I'm just going to open this guy up in PowerShell. I'll just change one parameter for the correct URL, and then we'll just try it off on this one and see what happens. There it is. So I want to change this to PWA4. Go ahead and execute this. I'm sure most of you have seen this before in the other webcasts. So we're basically just doing our standard deactivating and then reactivating the web part. That's what's going on right here. You can see right now it's doing a retraction. Hopefully this will work for us. Should only take a second here. Almost there. I don't know why that took so long. Probably because IIS was reset. Okay, there it is. Let's go to 4. We should be all activated. So let's go to Project Center. We'll just add a new project. And I'll try and drop that in real quick. Oh, we've got a project. We'll just use that one. Let's go into our proposal details page, and I'll drop it in there. I got to make sure we have a couple issues in the list. Let's go to issues first. Just add a few very quickly so you can see something display. Okay, here we go. I'm going to do one more. Okay, so now we have a couple issues in the list. Let's edit the page, try and drop this in. Our last chance. Add a web part. All right. I don't see it. Well, I think I'm going to let it go at this point since we hit that snag. At any rate, I think everybody can understand from looking at the code. What it'll do is we'll drop a web part in. It's basically going to go out and read the list, in this case the issues list, and display it in the web part so I can see those items. So that's really what the web part does. And I apologize for the snafu there on the last step. I don't know why it didn't show up. So let me return back to the slide deck. That is the last of our 4 solution starters for today. Let's come back to the slide deck and wrap this thing up. So here's some resources. This top link again, this is the link to the code gallery for the solution, all the solution starters that are in all 4 of these series that are available. So you can download both the deployment binaries and also the code, and there will be some other documentation put up there as well in the next week or so. Some other related webcasts that might be interesting on the solution starters. Here's some links. And here's some additional resources just on Project 2010 in general that might be also useful for you. And with that, I'm going to toss it back to Otto for a minute. And we're now at the question and answer period. Otto? I don't know where Otto is. So anyway, at this point there is, here's some additional information about the webcast. There's supposed to be a survey that pops up here, and I thought this was the spot. I don't know, to be honest. Otto normally takes care of these things. At any rate, now we're at the point, we only have a couple minutes left, but if there are any questions, now's the time using the question and answer panel, if you would like. If there are no questions, we can conclude this webcast. There will be one more. The last of the 4 is on Thursday, covering the remaining solution starters. I don't see any questions, so with that, I will turn it over. It looks like we'll leave it on this page. This is where the survey is. So please, if you have a chance, go ahead and fill out the survey. And with that, I'll wrap it up. I don't see any questions. Thank you, everyone, for attending today. We appreciate it, and hope to have you back on Thursday for the final in the series. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. And I'd also like to remind everyone that you can print a PDF of the slides by pressing Control-P. There's also a little printer icon in the lower right-hand corner of the screen there. You can either print those or save those locally for your convenience. And as Mike mentioned, the survey here should be showing up in your slide area. Feel free to take a moment here to fill this out. We certainly appreciate any additional feedback that you're able to provide about the content and the series. And all you need to do is just follow the links provided to complete the evaluation. And with that, I'd like to extend a special thanks to Mike, again, for giving us a lot of great information today and some great demos. And as always, we'd like to thank you, our audience, for joining us. We certainly hope that this information has proven useful to you and your business. And you may now disconnect from the audio portion of today's conference.